Good morning. On page 375, it's chapter 13. Hand over your second skin to. Can you behead a man whose head has already been cut off? You can. Can you skin the hide of a man when he has already been skinned? You can. This was all invented in our camps. This was all devised in the archipelago. So let it not be said that the brigade was our only Soviet contribution to the world penal science. Is it not the second camp term a contribution to? The waves which surge into the archipelago from outside do not die down there and do not subside freely, but are pumped through the pipes of the second interrogation. Oh, blessed are those pitiless tyrannies, those despotisms, those savage countries, where a person once arrested cannot be arrested a second time. Once in prison, he cannot be re-imprisoned, where a person who has been tried cannot be tried again, where a sentenced person cannot be sentenced again. But in our country, everything is permissible. When a man is flat on his back, irrevocably doomed, and in the depths of despair, how convenient is it to polyact him again? The ethics of our prison chiefs are, beat the man who's down, and the ethics of our security officers are, use corpses as stepping stones. We may take it the camp interrogations in Camp Court were born on Solovki, although what they did there was simply to push them into the bell tower basement and finish them off during the period of the 5-year plans of the metastases. They began to employ the second camp term instead of the bullet, for how otherwise, without second or third or fourth terms, could they secrete in the bosom of the archipelago and destroy all those marked down for destruction? The generation of new prison terms, like growing out of a snake's rings, is a form of archipelago life. As long as our camps thrived and our exiled land lasted, this black thread hovered over the heads of the convicted, to be given a new term before they had finished the first one. Second camp terms were handed out every year, but most intensively in 1937 and 1938, during the war years. In 1948-49, the burden of second terms was transferred outside. They missed prisoners who should have been resentenced in camp, and then had to haul them back into the camp from outside. These were even called repeaters, whereas those resentenced inside didn't get a special name. And it was a mercy, an automated mercy, when in 1938, second camp terms were given out without any second arrest, without a camp interrogation, without a camp court, when the prisoners were simply called up in brigades to the records and classification section and told to sign for their second terms. For refusing to sign, you were simply put in the punishment block, as for smoking where it wasn't allowed. And they also had it all explained to them in a very human way. We aren't telling you that you are guilty of anything, but just sign that you have been informed. In the Kolyma, that's how they gave out tenors. But in Vorkuta, it was even less severe, 8 years plus 5 years by the OSO. And it was useless to try to get out of it, as if in the dark infinity of the archipelago, 8 was in any way distinct from 18, or a tenor at the start from a tenor at the end of a sentence. The only important thing was that they did not claw and tear your body today. Now we can understand the epidemic of camp sentences in 1938 was the result of a directive from above. It was there at the top that they suddenly came to their senses and realized that they had been handing out too little, that they had to pile it on and shoot some too, and thus frighten the rest. But the epidemic of camp cases during the war was stimulated by a happy spark from Vol.2, by the features of popular initiative. In all likelihood, there was an order from above that during the war, the most colorful and notable individuals in each camp might become centers of rebellion and had to be suppressed and isolated. The bloody local boys immediately sensed the riches in this vein in their own deliverance from the front. This was evidently guessed in more than one camp and rapidly taken up as useful, ingenious, and salvation. The camp Chekists also helped fill up the machine gun embrasures, but without other people's bodies. Captain Averbakh, Godfather. Let the historian picture to himself the pulse of those years. The front was moving east. The Germans were around Leningrad, outside Moscow, Voronezh, on the Volga, and in the foothills of the Caucasus. In the rear, there were even fewer men. Every healthy male figure aroused reproachful glances. Everything for the front. There was no price too big for the government to pay to stop Hitler, and only the camp officers and their conferrers in state security are well-fed, white, soft-skinned, idle, all in their places in the rear. In illustration number 35, this camp godfather, for example, how badly he needed to stay alive. And the farther into Siberia and the north they were, the quieter things were. But we must soberly understand theirs was a shaky prosperity. Due to the end of the first outcry, bring out those rosy-cheeked, smart camp fellows. No battle experience, so they had ideology, and they would be lucky to end up in the police or in the behind-the-lines obstacle detachments. But it could happen otherwise. Otherwise it was into officer battalions and be thrown into the Battle of Stalingrad. In the summer of 1942, they picked up whole officer training schools and hurled them into the front, uncertified, their courses unfinished. All the young and healthy convoy guards had already been scraped up for the front, and the camps hadn't fallen apart. It was all right, and they wouldn't fall apart if the security officers were called up either. There were already rumors. Draft deferment, that was life. Draft deferment, that was happiness. How could you keep your draft deferment? Easy. You simply had to prove your importance. You had to prove that if it were not for the Chekist vigilance, the camps would blow apart, that they were a cauldron of seething tar, and then our whole glorious front would collapse. It was right here in the camps, in the tundra and the taiga, that the white-chested security chiefs were holding back the fifth column, holding back Hitler. This was their contribution to victory, not sparing themselves. They conducted interrogation after interrogation, exposing plot after plot. Until now, only the unhappy, worn-out camp inmates, tearing the bread from each other's mouths, had been fighting for their lives. But now the omnipotent Chekist security officers shamelessly entered the fray. You croak today, me tomorrow. Better you should perish and put off my death, you dirty animal. And so they cooked up a rebel group in Ust-Bin, 18 persons. They wanted, of course, to disarm the militarized guard, get its weapons away from it, half a dozen old rifles. What then? It's hard to picture the scale of the plan. They wanted to raise the entire North, to march on Vorkuta, on Moscow, to join up with Mannerheim. And telegrams and reports flew to the top. A big plot had been neutralized. There was unrest in the camps. The security staff had to be strengthened. And what was this? Plots were discovered in every camp. More plots, still more, even larger in scale and even broader. Oh, those perfidious last leggers. They were just feigning that they could be blown over by the wind. Their paper-thin, plague-stricken hands were secretly reaching for machine guns. Oh, thank you, security section. Oh, savior of the motherland, the third section. A whole gang sat there in that third section on the Tajida camps of Burya, Mongolia. Chief of the security operations sections, Sokolov. Interrogator, Mironenko. Security officers, Kalashnikov, Sosikov, Osinted. We've fallen behind. Everyone else has plots, and we have fallen behind. We do have a major plot, of course, but what kind? Well, of course, the militarized guard is to be disarmed. Yes, of course, they are going abroad. After all, the border will close, and Hitler was far away. With whom should they begin? The border was close, and Hitler was far away. And just as well-fed packs of hounds tears a thick, skinny, and mangy rabbit to bits, so did the sky blue pack hurl itself on the unfortunate Babbage, former Arctic explorer, former hero, now last legger, covered in ulcers. It was he who, at the outset of the war, had nearly turned over the icebreaker Sadko to the Germans, so all the threads of the plot were obviously in his hands. It was his scurvy-racked, dying body that was to save their well-nourished ones. Even if you're a bad Soviet citizen, we will still make you do as we wish. You will kiss our boots. You don't remember? We will remind you. You can't write? We will help you. You want time to think? Into the punishment cell on 10.5 ounces. And here's what another security man told him. I am sorry. I'm very sorry. Of course, you will come to understand later on that it would have been sensible to do as we demand. But it will be too late. When we can break you like a pencil between our fingers. Where do they get this imagery? Do they think it up themselves? Or is there a selection of such phrases in Chekhov's textbooks, composed by some unknown poet? And here is the interrogation by Mironenko. Hardly had they brought Babbage in that he was hit by the smell of tasty food, and Mironenko made him sit quite close to the steaming meat borscht and cutlets, and as though unaware of that borscht and those cutlets, or even that Babbage could see him, he gently cited dozens of arguments to relieve his conscience and justify not only the possibility, but the necessity of giving false testimony. He reminded Babbage amiably, when you were arrested the first time, in freedom, and tried to prove your innocence, you did not, after all, succeed, did you? No, you didn't succeed, because your fate had already been decided before your arrest. That's how it is now. That's how it is now. Well, eat the lunch. Go ahead, eat it before it gets cold. If you are not stupid, we will get along very well. You will always be fed and provided for. Otherwise. And Babbage shuddered. Hunger for life had turned out to be stronger than the thirst for truth. He had begun to write down everything dictated to him, and he slandered 24 people, of whom he knew only 4. And for the entire period of the interrogation he was fed, but never given enough, so that at the first sign of resistance they could lean on his hunger again. reading the record of his life, written before his death, sends shivers down your spine. From what heights and into what depths can a brave man fall? Can all of us? And so it was that 24 people who knew nothing about anything were taken to be shot or to get new terms. And before the trial, Babbage was sent off to the state farm as a sewage disposal worker, and then gave testimony at the trial, and then was given a new tenure, with his previous term erased, but he died in camp before completing his second term. What about the game from the Digita third section? Well, will someone investigate that gang? Anyone? Our contemporaries? Our descendants? And you thought that in camp, at least you could unburden your soul? That here, you could at least complain aloud. My sentence is too long. They fed me badly. I have too much work. Or the thought that here, you could at least repeat what you got returned for. But if you say any of this aloud, you are done for. You are doomed to get a new tenure. True, once a new camp tenure begins, at least the first is erased, so that it works out. You serve not 20, but some 13 or 15 or the like, which will be more than you can survive. But you are sure you have been silent as a fish, and then you were grabbed anyway. Quite right. They couldn't help grabbing you no matter how you behaved. After all, they don't grab for something, but because. It's the same principle according to which they clip the wool off freedom too. When the third section gang goes hunting, it picks a list of the most noticeable people in the camp, and that is the list they then dictate to Babbage. Excuse me. In camp, after all, it is even more difficult to hide. Everything is out in the open, and there is only one salvation for a person: to be a zero, a total zero from the very beginning. To stick you with a charge presents no problem. When the plots came to an end after 1943, the Germans began to retreat. A multitude of cases of propaganda appeared. Those godfathers still didn't want to go to the front. In the Buropolem camp, for example, the following selection was available. Point: hostile activity against the policy of the Soviet Communist Party and the Soviet government, and what it was, you can guess for yourself. Expression of defeatist fabrications, expression of slanderous opinions about the material situation of the workers of the Soviet Union, telling the truth with slander, expression of a desire for the restoration of the capitalist system, expression of a grudge against the Soviet government. This was particularly impudent. Who are you, you bastard, to nurse grudges? So you got a tenor, and you should have kept your mouth shut. A 70-year-old former Tsarist diplomat was charged with making the following propaganda: that the working class in the USSR lives badly, that Gorky was a bad writer. To say that they had gone too far in bringing these charges against him is out of the question. They always handed out sentences for Gorky. That's how he had set himself up. Skvortsov, for example, in GULag near Ust-Vim, harvested 15 years, and among the charges against him was the following: he had unfavorably contrasted the proletarian poet Mayakovsky with a certain bourgeois poet. That is what it said in the formal charges against him, and it was enough to get him convicted. And from the minutes of the interrogation we can establish who that certain bourgeois poet was. It was Pushkin. To get a sentence for Pushkin, that, in truth, was a rarity. After that, therefore, Martinson, who really did say that the tin shop in the USSR was one big camp, ought to have sung praise to God that he got off with the tenor, as ought those refusing to work, who got a tenor instead of execution. But it was not the number of years, not the empty and fantastic length of years, that made these second terms so awful, but how you got them. You had to crawl through that iron pipe in the ice and snow to get them. It would seem that arrest would be nothing for a camp inmate, for a person who had once been arrested from its warm domestic bed. What did it matter to be arrested again from an uncomfortable barracks with bare bunks? But it certainly did. In the barracks the stove was warm, and a full bread ration was given. But here came the jailer and jerked you by the foot at night. Gather up your things. Oh, how you didn't want to go. People, I love you. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.